Mirë unë jam ambasadori i Shqipërisë në Britani. Biseda do jetë në anglisht. Good afternoon, Sally. Welcome to everybody. I'm the Albanian ambassador to the UK and Ireland. Sally's from Ireland. She's an award-winning journalist and photographer. She was born in Dublin, studied law at University College Dublin, and then international relations at Trinity College Dublin. Before we get into the subject matter, it's all classified as human rights, but it's actually migration. I had a question that was, well, I've put all the questions down, but a question that slightly bothered me earlier on today, and I thought, normally it's about people from northeastern part of Africa, and maybe sometimes the Balkans, making the way to Western Europe. But what makes somebody like you do the opposite? I go from Ireland and Britain to, the first time we spoke, it was Lebanon, but then also Eritrea and Ethiopia and Sudan.
Oh, sorry, am I meant to answer?
You are, yes, please. Very shortly, because then I'll get into the introduction.
Okay, yeah, so no, that's a good question, and probably one that I could answer very lengthily and will play into a lot of the themes we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you want of a history of me.
Very short, because we can get into it later.
Yeah, that's what I mean,
yes.
Sorry, because it ties into everything else. But yeah, I mean, if, like, sorry, I'm just thinking how to sum that. Like, so I graduated actually during the economic crisis in Ireland. I'm sure people know Ireland basically went bankrupt and had to be bailed out, and that was when I finished college, and so, or as English people call it, university, and I couldn't find a job like many other Irish people at that time. We had a massive outflow of migration from the country, and like everybody else, I looked for a job abroad, went to London, which many people even here seem to think we're the same country, but we're definitely not. The Republic of Ireland is very independent. And yeah, so I went to London, which for me was like a very foreign place, by the way, and ended up working as a journalist. You know, I was looking for a job, and I mean, that's why I was thinking so long, because actually we're going to talk about migration. Obviously, lots of people here don't know yet what the book is about, but underplaying a lot of the book is the idea of inequality and the different rights that different people have just due to the random fact of where they were born. And obviously my entire career comes out of the fact that I was born in a place where I was given this privilege of a powerful passport, and when I needed to, I was able to move, and later I was then able to move to report internationally. I lived in Uganda for 2 years, Sierra Leone. At the moment I'm living in Lebanon, and I have that capacity because of the fact of where I was born, and so many people don't have that. And I just wanted to say as well, I'm so happy to be here in Albania. I had never been here before. I know that there is, you know, both a massive history of migration, but also a lot of migration, and that a lot of Albanians are facing a lot of the issues that I talk about in the book, in terms of the way that they're portrayed can be very different to the way that somebody from, you know, Western Europe, for example, is portrayed when they make certain decisions to do certain things to change their life. And I'm also very grateful for His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador Uran, who's interviewing me, who said that I can mention his personal story. He traveled to the UK first in a boat to Italy, I believe, and later in a truck to the UK illegally as a 17-year-old, and went on to attend Oxford, and is now the Albanian ambassador to the UK. So the fact that he's the one having this conversation with me, it's like very meaningful.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. That was a lot more than I bargained for, especially, and I must remind everybody that I have immunity in Britain, not in Albania. But that just goes to show why Sally got the Orwell Prize for Political Writing in 2022 for the book that we'll be discussing at length today. And it's called My Fourth Time We Drowned. It offers a powerful exploration of the perilous journeys that migrants make, particularly from the northeastern part of Africa. Could you and I briefly summarize the book? The central character is Essie, but you also go into the aid agencies, and you have a word or two about some other characters. There's one from Sierra Leone. So Essie, how does he come into the story?
Yeah, I mean, so the book, basically the way the book came about was kind of not random, but what I've learned as a journalist, you don't necessarily go out to report on a particular thing. It can be that, you know, you meet some people, they give you some tips, you follow those, you meet more people, you get to know more things. And I think my reporting on migration, I never set out to report on migration. I was living in the UK in 2015, working for Vice News at the time of, you know, the European migrant crisis, as they call it. And a lot of my reporting has come from me having all the same questions that people there were kind of having, or the misunderstandings, for example, like not really understanding what does migrant crisis mean, not understanding the kind of portrayal of people. And I think the book is, in some senses, an exploration of, like, by the way, I didn't want me to be in the book at all, but I learned to put together a book, you kind of need a narrative thread. So partially the book is me as a journalist investigating what is actually going on here, and some of the failures to see the nuance and the corruption and the exploitation and the actual complexities of this situation, and where the power is being held and which stories were being told and why some of them are quite problematic. But it also starts with a Facebook message that I got in 2018. So this is the very beginning, and it said, it just came out of nowhere. It said, "Hi, Sister Sally, we need your help. We're under bad condition in Libya prison. If you have time, I'll tell you all the story." And that message came from a group of people who had been locked up in a Libyan migrant detention center. And I don't know, maybe lots of people don't know so much about Libya or why it's important to this story, but Libya is in North Africa, and people who are fleeing all different situations across Africa, the Middle East, Asia, a lot of them end up in Libya trying to cross the central Mediterranean to Italy. It's been known traditionally as the deadliest migration route in the world, or certainly by the UN, like for a lot of the last decade. And so you kind of, it's not that it's one group of people, it's like many, many people, but what you have is a European Union effort to stop people from making this journey, which has resulted in, you know, very strong evidence of crimes against humanity. And so there's been interceptions happening since, I mean, they were happening before, but EU-supported interceptions since 2017, which means that now more than 145,000 people have been caught at sea, forced back to Libya, and many of them locked up indefinitely. And so the book, the people who contacted me were among these people. So they had tried to cross to Europe, they'd been caught at sea, forced back, locked up. They reached out to me very, you know, unexpectedly, and I basically, that first message started me spending years in daily communication with people who were in this situation. And so the book, it does have personal stories of people, but I wasn't trying to write the story of, you know, a refugee or an asylum seeker, because obviously people can do that for themselves, I hope. But it was kind of through those stories also telling the wider story of these European abuses, of the policies that are fueling, you know, worsening the situation, basically, of kind of political efforts to stop migration actually making things worse, and the silencing of the voices of those people. And so I should say, by the way, everything I say is much better explained in the book, so I really hope people will read it, because it's hard to explain everything here. But yeah, there are personal stories, and I did not want to make it just a list of, you know, human rights abuses. I wanted to actually explain that these are people, the things they're going through. You know, even I describe how people fall in love in detention centers, how they, you know, find, you know, create, I don't know, there's all different scenes, like creating, exercise bars, like to work out in one situation, or like people banding together to kind of find way to fight against the guards. Or there's many, many different descriptions of how people get by in these situations, and those are told through the personal stories as well.
I second that. I think you should buy the book and read it. And I say it as somebody who was put it mildly, cynical towards it at first, because I thought, what does this person who was born in Ireland know about it? As Sally mentioned, I have some experience of this story, and I thought, my God, these people from Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Darfur, their experience must be horrible, because they were also not incarcerated, they were locked in these camps. So I thought, what does she know about this? And then I read the book, and there were bits where I thought, oh yeah, that's true. And even though Sally says that she appears in the book, I think she manages to be an observer. So you're not thread in the story of the migrants, you are quite a disinterested observer. So it becomes slightly more objective. But before we move on, about the book, just to convince you, it has been received to widespread acclaim. I want to read you just a couple of these reviews from the Financial Times of 2022. It puts a human face on the refugees that European governments are striving to prevent reaching the shores of the EU. And another one by our very own Christina Lamb, who appeared earlier on this platform, says, a veritable masterclass in journalism, the most riveting, detailed and damning account ever written on the deadliest of migration routes. Now, how have you found the responses so far of these reviews, or even the readers? Did any of these reviews surprise you?
Yeah, that's a good question. And when you asked me it, I didn't really know what to say, because I honestly had no idea about writing a book before. I didn't know anything about how books are put together. And I because basically the way that this story started, it was, like I said, I got that first Facebook message. I ended up in communication with this one group of people, and to cut a very long story short, they were kind of in a life or death situation, what seemed like a life or death situation at that time. They had been abandoned in a war zone. The guards who had been guarding them had run away. They didn't have food or water. They were looking for help. And so initially I just, I was freelance journalist at the time. I posted, first I kind of pitched editors, but it was a Sunday and sometimes they take a while to respond. So I started posting screenshots of these messages on Twitter, and the result of that was not as I expected, just that these people would be helped, but also that I had thought that this was kind of an isolated situation, that this one group of people, they needed help, and if they were helped, then, that would be my job done, basically. And instead, I started getting contacted by people who were locked up in many other detention centers. And just to explain, again, it's all in the book, but phones were banned in the detention centers, but people had hidden phones, and it wasn't so widely known that these phones were in a lot of the centers. A lot of people from the NGOs, for example, didn't really know this. And instead of helping this one group, I started getting messages from many, many other people in many other detention centers, and I ended up having this Twitter thread that, as we say, went viral. It eventually got millions of views, and it became kind of a go-to place for people who were locked in detention centers. The centers are run by militias, by the way. They're not run by NGOs. They're not run by the UN. They're run by Libyan militias. And then you have these organizations that are being funded by the EU that are ostensibly meant to be helping, but they often have very limited access, so they don't necessarily know what's happening inside. So my Twitter thread was like a go-to place for these organizations to be like, oh, what's happening inside, for the refugees, the detainees, to kind of share, we haven't had food in 5 days, somebody is dying of this or that, there's a tuberculosis outbreak, we need this, somebody's being tortured. Sometimes they'd be like, they're being tortured in this room, and they'd give me a description of where that was happening, and I'd send that on. So anyway, to get to writing the book, that was your question, yeah?
Yes. But as you just to continue.
Oh no, I remember the feedback. I'll say very quickly. I for years I basically was like, what's the next thing I can do to expose this? And I worked for every international media, basically, like Channel 4 News, New York Times, the CNN, Al Jazeera, like everybody, I was constantly thinking, you know, my next report is going to expose this, because this was European policy that these people were ending up here, and it's still going on, by the way. Like, this was happening in my name as a European, and I was always thinking, the next thing that I write, the next thing I report, maybe that'll be the thing that turns the dial and makes people realize that this is happening. And eventually I realized, you know, that's not really, still nothing is changing. And by this time I had so much information that you know, so much evidence of wrongdoing that only I had. And I wanted to put that together. And so that was how the book came about. But honestly, I didn't know how books get published. My agent, by the way, is here. Patrick Walsh is the reason that the book got eventually published. But I really had no idea. I thought, you know, I just didn't know the process. And eventually, by the time the book came together, I was so terrified, because I was thinking, what is in this book is so explosive and so hard won. And like, I mean, it's in the book, like I faced, you know, personal security, like I was warned that there were like risks to my life. I was under criminal investigation at one point because of doing this reporting. My sources were all in danger. It was kind of safer to publish a book. Because of the delay, it meant that it was harder to identify the sources, and they would be often out of the detention, or like they were always out of the detention center by the time the book came out, which is why it was good to put it together. But I didn't care about critical acclaim like that. I did not write this book so that I could be like lauded or receive awards or anything. I wrote the book so that people would read it. And when it came out, I suddenly realized getting people to read it is really, really hard. And so that was why I was so grateful to everybody who helped. And for me, the awards, they don't mean something except that it meant that it was kind of like a validation of this information being important and true, and this being something. But I had I was very uncomfortable. For example, I won the Orwell Prize in the UK, and I was like, in a way, this is actually kind of horrifying for me, because I'm like a white privileged Westerner who's suddenly kind of career-wise seems to be benefiting from this, but actually the situation is staying the same for all the people in this. And you know, I've tried to constantly point this out, that actually we need to turn the focus on them and on this situation. And I mean, yeah, maybe you're going to ask me later, but the book, like, it has been, for example, cited in a submission to the International Criminal Court, calling for named European officials to be investigated for crimes against humanity, and it was used in one of the UK legal challenges against the Home Office Rwanda deportation scheme. It was also referenced there because there's a chapter on Rwanda, and there have been other kind of consequences, but for me that's meaningful, and the award stuff is just kind of to help with the readership.
The Orwell Prize is nothing to be sniffed at, which is a very good thing. But still, as you say, it's about making a difference. Now, since we're on the subject of freedom and transformation, may I just say that being white is not always a privilege, especially for somebody who leaves Albania and goes abroad. But speaking of your writing process, was there a point, because you're used to reporting events in real time, was there a point where you thought, this is more than an article, this is a book? And was that process very different?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I didn't know anything about book writing, so I basically like Googled. At some point I was like, I have a lot of information here now, maybe I should turn it into a book. And I like Googled like how many words are in a book, and the answer I got was, I think, between 60,000 and, I don't know, 100,000. So I was like, 60,000 is probably okay. If I write like 1,000 a day for 2 months, then I'll have a book, and then someone will publish it, I'm sure, in a few months, and everything will be great. And that was the point when I literally, like, for 2 months, I was like, every day, like, I'm writing my 1,000 words to get this together. And after that, I suddenly realized it's quite hard to get a book published. And I think at that point I'm grateful actually for the period of time, because I was kind of trapped in this like almost fight or flight, very urgent. I was constantly thinking, these people are in an emergency situation right now. Like, they can't wait a year for me to get something together. And so at the time, like, if I had known how long it takes to get a book published, I probably wouldn't have gone for it. But because I had no idea about that, I did end up putting together a book. And when I realized it took much longer, but I already had a lot done, I was like, okay, I'll still work on that. And I'm very grateful for that time, because I think it made the book a lot stronger in terms of me having to zone out. So I've worked as a journalist, now for a decade. There's a lot, and I think you're going to ask me about this if we still have time, but in terms of the media coverage of migration, for example, a lot of the terminology, a lot of the ways that things are spoken about, I think is happening because there's kind of formulaic ways you write articles, and a lot of journalists, they're always on deadlines every day, they don't have time to like sit back and go, why are we using these words? What does it mean when we say this? Why are we trusting this source? Why are we repeating what these people say as fact? And actually, like, the extra time that I had to actually put this book together in the end, because of the way publishing works, meant that I had a chance to suddenly zoom back and go, wait a second, like, why am I always, for example, I don't know, like the word migrants, for example, like, why do I use the word migrant without thinking, what does that mean and what are the connotations? And
Yes.
or why do I, like, the book questions like certain organizations like UNHCR, for example, when they make a statement and you repeat it as fact, but like we're not acknowledging that a lot of their funding comes from the EU, for example, who are actually responsible for certain policies that are causing certain problems. And so the book, one of the things it looks at is UNHCR statements and cases where they were not accurate in terms of how they were portraying the situation. I think that my mind, even now, like even talking about the book now, I'm like, there are things that I didn't realize when I wrote this book that now I'm like, oh, my mind has gone even, having conversations around it, it's gone even bigger. And yeah, we could probably talk,
Yes.
like, I'd love to hear your views on this too, but we're obviously limited on time.
If we have some time, I suppose the one comment I had about the book versus the article is that it just occurred to me that the benefit of the book is that it gives some time to these people to escape their reality, hopefully for better reasons, because the real life reporting would endanger them, I'd assume. And the second one about the use of particular words and particular notions, terms, something that has bothered me, let's put it bluntly, in Britain is the term of illegal migrant that has become fashionable recently. I think with mostly political connotations rather than from a legal point of view, especially for Britain. Now, interested people can go and read online about why an irregular migrant would make more sense than an illegal migrant. But to go back into the book and how it sheds a light on this human perseverance, did this affect you in any way? Did this portrayal affect you personally?
What do you mean by portrayal?
The whole story. Going through the stories of these people, not just their perseverance, but also their suffering. Did it affect you?
Yeah, like the book, again, like I said, I didn't set out to write a book. I wasn't just collecting the stories in this book. This book is kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of what I was doing over those few years, in terms of my involvement in this situation. And that's obviously the tip of the iceberg in terms of the general situation in Libya. And people who read it, they can see, this is not me saying I'm like super amazing or anything. It's like, I started playing quite a large role in this situation because there were complete failures of what was happening. It was like a breakdown of these systems that were meant to be protecting people. That meant that a lot of vulnerable people who were locked up indefinitely were contacting me and searching for help. It took over my entire life. Yes. So I don't know how I can say it. Like, I was 28 when I started, when I got those first messages. Every night I was messaging people, particularly during the day as well, but all night, because they had hidden phones, so they weren't allowed to message. They couldn't be caught with the phones. So when it was nighttime, people would hide under blankets and start texting me, this is what happened today. I'd generally be up from like 11 p.m. maybe to 3 a.m. just messaging very upset, traumatized people who were suffering very massive things, and gathering all that information. And then often I'd pass it on to different NGOs or UN agencies. And you know, a lot of that, it's not in the book, but that was the kind of undertone. And I ended up then traveling to many of the countries as well. So Rwanda, where I'm now banned, and Ethiopia, where I went to report on smuggling trials. There's a chapter on that in the book where I kind of find out that 2 of the smugglers who had smuggled a lot of the people I was in touch with were apprehended in Ethiopia. So I go and attend their trial. And yeah, I traveled all around Europe as well, meeting people. I mean, even today I've been messaging people who are mentioned in this book, like we're still in touch. But in terms of the effect it had on me, it totally changed my life. Like, I don't know what I would be doing if I hadn't got that first message. And I was really propelled. Like I said, it wasn't because I just wanted to tell the story of the people messaging me. It was because I'm a European and I realized that this was being done in my name. And I was a journalist who had already reported on migration. So if I wasn't aware that people were being locked up, you know, and exposed to things like rape, torture, starvation, medical neglect, you know, dying very regularly in a lot of the centers. If I hadn't known about that, imagine the general Europeans, the fact that they hadn't known about it. So I was really like propelled all of that time, and it affected like all the decisions I was making were decisions around how can I keep reporting on this, because I can't think of anything more important than this right now.
Right. Next topic is about, well, within migration, it's a contradiction that occurs in reality between migration being this fundamental part of human nature to move and to explore. We're hardwired for seeking new opportunities. At the same time, the Western world needs more people because of depopulation, as it was mentioned in the previous talk, whether for cultural diversity or demographics and so on. Yet, migration is very unpopular. Now, when you speak to people in Europe, the UK and Ireland, do you notice something about their attitude to migration, and where do you think they're sourcing this information from?
Yeah, that's a good question, and honestly, I'd love your opinion on it as well. I think one thing that again, it's one of these things that you kind of know, but like you are failing to verbalize or to point out exactly sometimes. I think in Ireland and in the UK as well, there's kind of this assumption, and I don't know if you want to call it white privilege. I mean, I know you're saying that obviously not all white people are privileged, but like Western privilege or whatever it is, there's this assumption that we have the relative freedom of movement, but other people don't. And like a lot of the debates that we have, or that we hear, are always from people who have this underlying feeling that they have the right to freedom of movement, but other people don't. And those are the voices that we hear on that. That's the assumption. Like even the fact that I came here to Albania, I didn't Google, by the way, do I need a visa? I just assumed that they will let me into the country when I land in the airport. Like that is not an assumption for like a large proportion of the world. They could never just assume that any country will let them in. And I think that, yeah, that's, you know, like, and then, I mean, the irony is, by the way, that I was living in London for 5.5 years. Like I said, that was why your first question made me think a lot. I lived there as an economic migrant, even though, like, nobody there would say that that's what they called me. I reported on the Brexit referendum, by the way, and I told people I'm an economic migrant. They were like, no, you're different, you know. And I was like, I literally came to London to steal your jobs. And anyway, the irony is that London was very expensive if you're a freelance journalist, and I stayed freelance so I could focus on this topic. So I was like, got offered by my newspaper, the Irish Times. They said, you know, if you move to an African country, you can cover Africa for us, still as freelance, but with regular work. So I moved to Uganda, again as an economic migrant, because it was cheaper to live there, and I had regular work if I moved there. And yeah, when I got to Uganda, people call you an expat, you know? So there's this term expat that means migrant. Like, it means the same thing, but because you're a privileged person, you just have this different word to describe you doing the same thing. But obviously, because you have that privilege, like, I don't need a visa, by the way, to get into Uganda either. So, yeah, it's very... I don't know. I'm still, for me, there's people who are way more eloquent, and probably you could explain this better than I can, but I do think that those assumptions are just not challenged because they're so obvious to people, and yet actually, like, yeah, we should be kind of understanding better that there's that total inequality, you know?
Yes. Well, first things first. The reason why I didn't explore the need for a visa to come to Albania is because Albania is a very welcoming country. That is one. The second is about, I think, Britain seeing things in black and white, whether, well, another compliment to Albania is that I think, ironically, there's more freedom of thought in Albania, in the extent that you wouldn't really ask people, do you believe in climate change? That'd be odd. That'd be almost religious. You either argue it with facts, and people think about it. They don't believe in it. Belief is sort of relegated to religion. And I think Albanians are much better at that than the Brits. Now, if that hasn't turned the tables on you yet, I wanted to say something about, well, before I get there, not thinking in black and white, I think that there is a problem in Britain with negating the feelings of people that when they are against migration, not listening to them, and brandishing them as sort of nutcases and xenophobes and so on. So rather than saying, well, what are your fears, and arguing against them, sort of rubbishing them, I don't think it works in the long run. But speaking of Ireland, Ireland has been a very welcoming country until recently. Sinn Féin, a left-wing party, has turned almost against migrants. Do you see something strange there?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm not the most qualified to discuss Irish politics because I left there in 2013, 2014, so I tend to avoid commenting specifically, particularly on political parties. But I do think that Ireland, I mean, yeah, things like we had these far-right kind of riots last November, I think. I think that there's a general feeling that that the mood is shifting, that
Yes.
it's becoming less welcoming.
I'm happy with that. In the interest of time, there's a bit in the book that I thought was very moving, and well, maybe before we get there, could you tell us very quickly what have you done since writing this book? And I'll end it with
Yeah,
the
sure.
reading.
What have I done? So the book came out 2022. I've done a lot of publicizing it, like I said, to try and actually make people read it. So I'm very grateful if anyone reads it. That's the goal of everything. Apart from that, I mean, I'm still reporting on this topic. I was on a rescue ship in the Mediterranean in August. And yeah, generally I'm reporting on, I don't know, a lot of different things. And what has happened with the book? I mean, yeah, just thinking in terms of what you said about the feedback earlier as well, the reviews, like one thing that surprised me is that there's been a lot of support, for example, from different parts of the EU, a lot of it obviously anonymous, like not publicly, but like I've been getting a lot of people coming to me who work for these various institutions and saying we're actually so glad that this is public because they're feeling very uncomfortable about generally the direction that things are going in. A lot of them will say, you know, we feel like unless the European public cares that we can't do anything because we're going to be voted out and far right are going to get into power. And I was invited, for example, to speak in the European Parliament last November at the Conference of Ombudsman. So Emily O'Reilly invited me, and the European Commission, there was someone there responding as well to my speech. And that was about the topic of the book and where I kind of see things going wrong in terms of dehumanization and not recognizing, you know, the scale of everything. And at the same stage, I always say, by the way, I'm a journalist, I'm not an activist. I just wanted to document the situation because I feel like you can't really make policies without understanding the consequences of those policies. And so I'm never saying this is exactly what you should do, but I'm just saying we need to understand what is being done already. And yeah, I guess apart from, I don't know if that fully answers that, but yeah, I don't know. It's been interesting and having those discussions, but I also think it's been very depressing, and that's why, like, you know, this is Freedom and Transformation Festival. I always feel like everybody who who absorbs this information, they have their own capacity to decide what should be done and to think about that. But we all have a responsibility as well. And I include Albania in that, by the way, because you guys are also tied into what's happening in Europe and have a big role. You know, we have a lot of migration links and also are being demonized, by the way, a lot in the UK. So there's there's a bigger discussion to be had there that I think includes the voices of Albanians, and they're very important voices to hear in this.
We're into question and answer, but I think I can steal 2 more minutes because this letter is rather moving, and I feel that I have to read it. It's a moving letter written by one of the migrants, one who survived for the one who didn't, and it's called an irate letter to a friend, an angry letter to a friend. Dear friend, all of my attention is focused on standing and saluting you, my dear friend. It's been a long time. This world is a sorry place, but it's been graced with your presence. Sleep well, old friend. You're not in my heart, you're in my soul. Now you're nothing, but you meant everything and you are me. Why did you choose to fall and disappear? Why don't you come back? I'm waiting alone, counting the stars. Each drop of my tears has its unique, unforgettable, beautiful, sad, successful, and powerful existence. Even if we fail together, we wanted to wake up together again and start to move forward. You chose to rest. I don't care why you chose it, but you left me in hell. You condemned me to live without mourning, while mourning. I say loudly and angrily, I'm hurting. You got me to hurt. You resemble love for me, not just love, but life. I never thought that you might leave me with my loneliness, and now I suffer from being alone without you. How could you do that, my old friend? May heaven calm you. You lived hard and struggled a lot in this earth full of fakes. But me, I will always accuse you of leaving me behind in this world of evil. May your soul rest peacefully. Long live my most beloved, dear friend of mine. You're nothing, but you are me, because I was nothing, but I'm you. By Walikwa Sena. Could you tell us very briefly about the context to this letter?
Yeah, so this was written by a poet who was incarcerated for quite a long time in Libya, and he very, very, very kindly let me include it in the book, for which I'm very grateful. And yeah, I was writing this book, and like I said, I was kind of figuring out how to do it, and I just realized that I don't want everything to, a lot of the problem of what's happening now is everything is being filtered through a Western voices, Western lens. I mean, I'm not saying that I haven't done that, but I tried as much as possible to include direct quotations from the messages that I received. They're interspersed throughout the book in italics, direct quotations, but also then I wanted to put in this poem. And yeah, I just think it's really beautiful. And yeah, that writer, he has now written his own book, but it's in Tigrinya, unfortunately, so I don't know if anyone can speak it, but one of the things, because I had so many moral problems with writing this book for myself, and I always think you need to be self-questioning as a journalist and as a person with some degree of power as well, and with a voice that can be listened to, and I wanted, for example, not to keep, I didn't want to make loads of money off this book and keep it for myself. I thought, the prize money, for example, I wanted to give it away. Some of the proceeds I gave away to help people. And one of the things I did was give money to print this writer's book when he wanted to print it. So it's now available, but in Tigrinya, but maybe in English in the future. And I think he's now got out of Libya quite recently, but he was in Libya for a very long time.
Well, thank you very much. It's been wonderful. I think we're into Q&A time. I don't know how much time we have. 10 minutes? Okay. So I'll take 2 questions at a time. Please make them quick so that we have time enough to cover them all. And please, no commentary. Questions? Joanne.
Really fast. Sally, can you tell us about how the UNHCR is willfully neglectful or even complicit interested in some of the atrocities that are taking place in these detention camps, because I think that having read your book, and the reason I invited you is because I found this part of your book to be the most explosive of all. So could you actually share some of that, some of what you found about that from your book?
One more, Audrey.
I find it kind of ironic talking about human rights and migrant affairs in a building that was recently renovated by China, and which cornerstone was put by Khrushchev in 1959. But indeed, actually, we are a country where talking about migration is necessary and very relevant, because we are a small country but with big migrant problem. And my question has to do with the fact that we are now experiencing some sort of global game of hot potato with migrants, and in a twist of fate, Albanian illegal immigrants are supposed to be sent by the UK to Rwanda, and as karma would say it, we will have African immigrants that were supposedly going to Italy, that will be held in Albania for a while. And we had a similar situation with the Afghanis, who were on the route to North America, but Albania became their final destination. Instead of a pit stop, we became like the place that they didn't book, but they became permanent. So basically, my question is, I mean, how would you recommend to deal with this sort of ping-pong game, but instead of balls, with human lives? And what can you recommend to Albania? How can we face international pressure to accept such, frankly saying, very annoying and humiliating deals, such as the one we have with Italy now?
Thank you. Probably one more, and then one at the end, and maybe two more. Let's do them all, and then.
Okay, but will you remember all of them? So I'm going to start.
I'm writing that out. Okay, so we'll do 2 by 2.
I'm going to start getting confused if there's too many.
You're right. You're right.
Both of those questions I could answer for a very, very long time, to be honest, and we don't have that time. So I'm really sorry, but maybe this one first. I actually went out to those. I went to the port Schengen on Thursday. To do a report on this situation. And yeah, I mean, what can I say? This is just people passing. The thing is, I like the term hot potato, actually. I always say snakes and ladders, but it's not really. Hot potato is a little bit better, actually. What's happening is people being passed around, but there's not really the focus on the people who are being trapped in the middle of that. And what's not being understood, maybe, I don't know, maybe it is, but is that the people who are likely to arrive here have probably potentially spent years already on these journeys. They're probably highly traumatized. They're going to be locked up, from what I can tell, at least enclosed in a kind of area that's technically Italian territory. So like the port director, for example, told me he's not allowed to enter the area because it's being controlled by the Italians, and he needs permission from Italy to actually go inside, even though it's obviously inside Albania. And it was kind of ironic in a way, because I was asking, Schengen port obviously is a place that Albanians used to take boats, illegally, if you do use that term or not, but like they used to take boats to go to Italy. And the port director was saying, we want to say thanks to them for having us, travel on these boats, illegally, if you say it like that. And one of the ways is to, cooperate with them when they ask us for something. And what's being lost is the voice of those people who are going to end up in those centers and those experiences. And yeah, I mean, what should people do? I mean, we need to be regarding those people as people. We need to be hearing their voices. And there's a lot more I could say, sorry, but anyway, I'll say that. And UNHCR, that was again one of the big topics of the book, is looking at the agencies that were kind of mandated to. So the accusation was that certain agencies and certain NGOs were being used to whitewash EU policy, and that this was one of the things that I discovered when I started doing this reporting. As a journalist who reports on migration, if I received a statement from UNHCR, I would publish that as fact. I would regard that as fact. In the past. And when I started reporting on Libya, I actually had done a big investigation into corruption in Sudan, in UNHCR Sudan, shortly before that, into allegations that UNHCR staff were involved in taking bribes of sometimes tens of thousands of dollars for resettlement to Western countries, and Sudan is neighboring Libya, and that was actually how the people in Libya ended up contacting me, and that investigation that I published in Sudan ended up with UNHCR finding one staff member guilty of soliciting bribes and abusing power, but there was obviously much greater problems going on there, and it shows a lot of things about how people feel about the unfairness of the system, for example. And in Libya, quite quickly it became clear that UNHCR was releasing statements that were not corresponding with what was happening on the ground. And I mean, I'm obviously being a bit careful about how I say this, but people can read the book to find exact examples of that. But why this is important is because UNHCR is the agency mandated to protect refugees, but also is often the representative of refugees in meetings with governments. And the governments are obviously the donors. And for example, you'd have UNHCR release a statement and say something like, thank you to the EU for giving us money to help these people in this detention center. But they'd never say, they're in the detention center because they've been forced back through EU policy and now they're locked up indefinitely. They don't have lawyers. Some of them are dying, and there are a lot of examples, so you can read the book. But for me, one of the key messages that I hope people at least start to question, again, I'm trying not to tell anyone what they should exactly think, but I think also they should be asking questions. What are the voices that we're listening to? Should the voice that we be listening to representing refugees be an agency that is funded by states that are trying to keep refugees out, or should it be like the people themselves? And yeah, the more times you can actually talk to the people themselves, the more information you can get that I think you will find contradicts a lot of the kind of broader understanding of what is happening in a lot of situations.
If I can cheat a little bit, I can slip in a question of mine in this, because it's sort of related to the abuse of these international organizations, but also solutions to current problems on migration. In one part of the book, you're quite, not scathing, but critical of the handling of the conflict in Libya. Somewhere you say, other commentators say the country was destined for catastrophic upheaval before NATO got involved, and their airstrikes saved lives, though Libyans should have been given much more assistance by the international community in the years that followed. Now, is this a sort of, I'll play devil's advocate, is this making a case for liberal imperialism where Western governments can go in ostensibly without any economic self-interest and fix things?
No, I would say all of that is above my pay grade, to be honest. I was just looking at the situation for migrants and refugees, the Libya 2011. I was still in university studying law. I wasn't really following international affairs as much as I should have been, and I'm putting together the history, and I do think it's important to analyze where the role that the international community plays in loads of different situations. It is relevant, but I'm a journalist, I'm not proposing that specific things should happen. I'm just saying what did happen, and that some people obviously argued this, some people argued that. It's good to include that.
Okay, so one question there, Lutfi, and then one at the end. Sorry, you can start.
Hello, I have a simple question because I don't understand, maybe it's a question for politics, for the government, for UK. Why not control the legal work? The legal work, you have maybe the company or the industry in the construction or in agro industry, and have the number of workers. And you take the Albanian government, the number of workers, and it's a normal legality.
That's an excellent suggestion.
I not understand this because it's so much time. The Albania is a problem in the United Kingdom. Albania maybe are 200,000 or little more 150,000.
I completely
not understand
agree, but
this. The government of United to collaborate.
No, you're right.
Maybe
but it's a
maybe
wrong
for
session.
my idea, it's the practice for 80s for the worker, but the Germany apply this in this moment.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm the Albanian ambassador to Britain. Maybe that's a question for the British ambassador to Albania, and that was in the previous session. So, Lutfi?
Thank you, Uran, for these fascinating talks. My question is, we are living in a world where the word migration is framed very often as security issues, and look at the debate at the US elections. How do you believe the narrative can be changed and focused more on human rights issues? And how can media play a role in this reframing, as you've done in your book?
I answered that one. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if we're doing two or one.
No, this is yours.
How can it be? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I get asked this a lot, and to be honest, I don't think I personally can answer that. Like, I think that we, I mean, I've tried to do that in a certain sense, like by writing this book. I do think that we always need to be asking why aren't certain voices being included, and a lot of the discussions, like I said, that are happening are completely removed from anybody who has direct experience of these things as a person who is kind of forced or compelled or decides to do it. And yeah, I mean, I think the more voices we can have out, the better. Like the more stories we have out, the better. But obviously, there's still people who will frame it as a security issue, and yeah, I've been trying, but I'm only one person, so.
I think we need to wrap up. It's been a wonderful book for me, a surprise, but a very good surprise. It's moving emotionally, but it's also informative. So thank you very much, Sally.
Thank you.